friends, and I can tell you he's an extremely interesting guy to talk to. In fact, so much so that I've been already enrolled in one of his courses. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering, a Master of Science in Applied Psychology. My books are falling all over the place here. Okay, to be expected. And a PhD in cybernetics. Cybernetics is basically how things work. I think you might be able to explain that. Okay. He told me once that his interest was in electrical circuitry as an electrical engineer actually inspired him to continue studies in neuroscience and the activity of the brain because it's electrical. He has worked at the CEO level with large organisations to reprogram the strategic thinking of their executives for over 40 years, during which time he has completed extensive research, experimentation and implementation of the latest scientific breakthroughs in medicine, behavioural psychology, cybernetics and the emerging field of neurotechnologies. In private practice, he works directly with individuals to teach them how to reprogram their brains to change the way they think, act, feel, making decisions like making conditions like depression, stress, fear, anger, anxiety, addictions, low self-worth, dementia, loss of memory, brain trauma, and Parkinson's much easier to deal with. Cliff moved away from traditional Western medicine because of the overuse of prescription drugs as cures and chose behavioural psychology as a more natural way to help people. He has also embraced Raja Yoga practices since he was 20 years of age, and that was only 3 or 4 years ago, right? Gentlemen and ladies, would you please welcome Dr. Clifford Saunders.
Wow. Well, thank you very much, Barry. That's a wonderful introduction. And you know, I think we, all of us, owe ourselves a round of applause because this is iteration 1. This is the first have a go at this kind of thing. So please give yourselves a round of applause for perseverance. Come on, this is amazing. Well done. I can't hear you. There you go. If you think about it, the very first version of, let's say, Microsoft Word, version 1, would have been a lot different from, let's say, version 10. And so if you think of this in terms of new product introductions, this is your first go at something like this, then really this is a game changer. Congratulations. So thank you very much, Barry, and it's great to meet everybody there in Mount Tamborine. As Barry said, it's 3 o'clock in the morning here for me, and it's amazing to be talking to you all the way from Alicante, Spain. And I'm going to be talking to you about how to reprogram your brain, this whole amazing field of neuroplasticity. Now, by a show of hands and a big loud shout, if I said to you that it's possible for you to turn the clock back in a number of ways, especially in your brain, would you like to learn how to do that? Oh, you spoilt it. I thought I'd have to go, I can't hear you. All right, okay, so that's all.
Damage the microphone, yeah?
Can you guys hear me all right? Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, all right. Now, I don't know the setup at Mount Tamborine. I don't know where the front door is for you to come into the building. But what I'd like you to do mentally, just for a second, before you came to the meeting, pretend you were coming in from the car park, from the parking lot, and as you came in the door, pretend that there was a coat rack where you could hang up your beliefs about what's possible. Right? Can you do that? Just pretend that you had a way of taking off your habitual beliefs and hanging up. and I'm hearing a bit of feedback. Can you guys hear some feedback, or is the signal clean? Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. The reason I want you to hang your beliefs up is because some of the information I'm going to be offering you may bump against things that you already know absolutely to be true. And I would rather let you take your beliefs when it's time to go, so that you get the chance to really listen to what I'm going to be talking about here. And I'm recording this conversation. I'm recording what we're doing so that you don't have to worry about taking notes. You're going to be getting all of this information, and I'm going to be sending a YouTube link so you can actually re-watch this and watch this again if you want to. So I'm going to be talking for about 45 minutes, and we're going to have to manage the time now. We're a bit late, and then the plan was at the 45-minute mark, give you guys the chance then to ask questions. Normally, I'd like you to be able to ask questions as we're going along, but that's not going to be possible with the time constraints we've got. So hold your questions, please. And I just a final thank you again to Barry and his team, and you as well, Rolf, for setting this up. I know this is a first. It's a bit of a challenge, and I'd like you to see it as an opportunity of improving what you're doing. And in fact, when you think about it for a minute, what we're doing with me being able to talk to you from Spain to a PROBUS club in Mount Tamborine, Queensland, once you get this debugged, this now becomes a very interesting and useful metaphor for you, not only for conversations you can have and speakers you can have for PROBUS, but also as a metaphor for your brain. Because if you think about it, from this point forward, there's no reason why you can't have a speaker from pretty well anywhere in the world, as long as you've got a decent internet connection and the computer doesn't blow up. So with that said, let's jump right into the content. So Barry did mention some things about my background, and to set context for you, what I'm going to do is just talk a little bit about myself and how I be here to actually speak to you at the moment. Now, I was born in 1949, which means that I'm 70 years and 2 months. So how many of you are older than 70 years? How many of you? 71 or more? All right. All right.
That's the majority.
That's the majority. Okay. All right. So I was born, okay, this is good. This is going to be perfect. You understand exactly where I'm coming from. In 1949, I was born with a horrendous case of eczema or eczema, right? A terrible skin condition. 65% covered, almost all of my body covered in these horrible scabs and so on. And the model back then in the early 50s was when you were taken to a doctor, what the doctor would say is, well, we're very sorry, but you're stuck. That what you've got is a genetic condition. And so from day one, I was beset with this idea of, oh, well, you've got it forever, poor thing. Okay, so I want you to hold that thought for a minute, because I want you to put that next to the idea that my nickname was Sir Lawrence. I just love showing off. So I'm a typical Brit tall poppy, right? I love showing off. I love talk. I love presenting. But I couldn't do theatre back when I grew up as a career, because as soon as I put the stage makeup on, my skin would start to peel off. I was allergic to this. So I had to kind of hold that idea. Oh, and there's another thing I need to let you know. I met Spike Milligan. How many of you, by a show of hands, know who Spike Milligan was? Just I want to get a rough idea. All right. All of you, pretty much. So I met Spike Milligan on the boat back from Sydney back to England after he had stormed his way around Australia, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, and I met him on the boat going back to England from Sydney. So I had those funny voices in my mind as well. So I took electrical engineering. I wanted to do theatre, but the practicality of it was I needed something that I could do. I took electrical engineering, and as Baz said, by the time I'd finished electrical engineering, I knew how electrical circuits worked. Turns out I'm a good theoretical electrical engineer, and now I'm a practical one, I'm glad to say. And from my bachelor's, I then took a master's in applied psychology. Remember, what I'm wanting to do is get back to figure out how can I get rid of these horrible scabs. And so part of my master's program was putting electrodes on people's heads to be able to measure the electrical activity. And by the time I'd finished my master's program, I now knew how electricity runs throughout the brain, both healthy and unhealthy circuits. As Baz said, my PhD is in cybernetics, which is the study of large, complex, messy systems. And along the way, in order for me to be able to cure myself of this eczema, I began to study Raja Yoga. And about 35 years ago, I met an American psychologist who works in the area of dehypnosis. You might wonder what dehypnosis is. Dehypnosis is the idea that we often don't need more convincing of something, more hypnosis. What we often need to do is dehypnotize ourselves of things we believe. The point of all of this is, as I was working my way through both on the engineering and scientific side and also on the esoteric Eastern side, I began to get better and better, and you'll see now I have no scabs at all. It's gone away. And it's the distillation of all of these ideas together that allows me to talk to you about this amazing science of neuroplasticity, of neuroscience. So, neuroplasticity. By a show of hands, how many of you have heard the term neuroplasticity before? Just how many of you heard of it? Okay, about a third of you or a quarter of you. Perfect. Neuroplasticity, what is it? Well, the name gives it away. Neuro, nerve, plasticity, plasticine, plastic, nutty putty. It turns out that we are wearing reprogrammable equipment. Neuroplasticity is the ability of our nervous system to reprogram and rewire itself throughout life. Okay? If you're alive, your nervous system is still able to reprogram itself. And like I mentioned, in the 50s, the model was the 50s and the 60s, as we're given a certain amount of endowment, we're given a certain amount of skills, but that it's genetic. And after that point of conception, we're stuck. It turns out not to be the case. Experiments done in the 70s, in the early 70s, are published in Nature. They had taken two sets of rats, and half of those rats they put in a very enriched environment, an environment where the rats could play, they could run through mazes, they could do all sorts of puzzles. And when their brains were examined after a couple of years, they seemed to be very complex, very interesting brains, a lot of dendritic structure. But their brothers and sisters were put in different types of cages where there wasn't anything to do. They were fed and watered, they were hydrated, but there were no games. There was nothing for the rats to do in these impoverished environments. And when their brains were sacrificed and looked at, they were very uninteresting brains. They had hardly any dendritic structures at all, which got people to realize back in the early 70s, maybe this idea of being stuck isn't quite true. Maybe we are neuroplastic and our environment can influence how the nervous system works. And that's really where the idea of neuroplasticity really began. Mind you, in the East, where I had been studying Raja Yoga, they've known about neuroplasticity for about 5,000 years, because yoga only works if the whole of the nervous system actually is reprogrammable. So that's the basic idea, that we are not stuck and that we are able to, using the right circumstances, we can reprogram ourselves. So the first step then, if you want to learn how to use these techniques, is to just realize you're not stuck. Just begin to wonder about this. My goodness me, this begins to sound like a superpower, and it is. It's as if this wall behind me actually has a door in it. That if I press around in the right way, there might be a little switch up here that you can't quite see. But if I press it, a panel opens and a door opens in the wall. Now, if a door opens in your world, in your possibilities that you'd never seen before, I hope the first thing you'd ask yourself is well, where do I start? If I go through that door, what shall I do? And so let me begin to explain to you the types of things that you can use this applied neuroplasticity for. And let me just say this. We've managed to get the network working now, and you can see me and I can present to you. In an analogous way, now that that door has been opened, and as you begin to debug the network and make it easier and easier for people to, as it were, dial into you, all of a sudden your world has gone from people that you can get to drive up to Mount Tamborine to anyone in the world. It's an analogous idea to what's really happening with neuroplasticity. As we begin to realize we've got new possibilities, our world opens up. Now, I've been working in this field for many years, and I've seen many people, hundreds, and the situations that I tend to deal with fall into three main buckets. The first one is you might think of as the mind, stuff to do with the mind, and in the mind I get you to think about, let's say, depression or anxiety or anger or fear or panic or self-confidence or forgiveness or disappointment, patterns that we have that are interfering with our life. Another area that I work with a lot is just the physical brain, not just the physical brain, the 3 pound of liver, as it were, that we live inside of. Because it turns out there's lots of things that we can do for this raw meat, if you like. We can improve our memory, for example, our decision-making ability. And we can brighten our brains. And remember, we live inside our brains. And the third area that we can deal with is the body as a whole. And I work with people that have, let's say, experiencing pain that they want to get rid of or modify or improve their balance, or insomnia or addictions, or any sort of physical disease or illness can often be ameliorated with these ideas, and a whole lot more than those applications. So they're the main areas that I've personally worked in with people with this notion of neuroplasticity. So with that as a preamble, what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus just at the moment on the mind stuff, on the patterns that might be interfering with our enjoyment of life, and then I'll introduce some ways of dealing with the brain and the body. How does that sound? All right. So now I'm going to teach you how to touch. So this is Brian. Say hello to Brian. Hello, Brian. There we go. Look at all the nice people. Oh, yeah. Nice. This is Brian. Now, don't make fun of Brian. He's been all the way to South Africa and back. This is your brain cat. What I want you to do is I want to teach you how you can talk to your brain. Okay? So we want you to say hello to your brain. I want you to tap the top of your head for me just for a moment. Could you do that? That's it. Okay, well done. All right, so tap. You're saying hello. Say hello. Okay, so you're saying hello. Now, I told you that in my master's program, I got to glue electrodes on people's heads. So if I had glued an electrode right on the top of your head where you were just tapping, and I took an electrical signal out, I could tell 250 milliseconds before you even began to move, a full quarter of a second, that you are going to move your hand up. Before you become consciously aware of something you're going to do, your brain already decides it. Think about that for a minute. It's your brain is really ruling everything that you do. We don't recognize this because it happens so quickly. But the fact is, your brain is creating your reality before you become aware that you're experiencing it. And that's important. We can use that quarter of a second. Because let's go back to my list of, quotes, problems with people's minds and think about them for a minute. And let me just say this. If an individual has experienced a concussion or what's called a TBI, a traumatic brain injury, then these methods don't work as well, and that becomes rather a speciality. We can talk about concussion a little bit later on, but assuming you've got a fully intact brain, then these methods are extremely powerful. Now let's take something like anger. When you think about it for a minute, you must know people who you've got to kind of dance around. You've got to be careful what you say. You don't want to upset them. You may even know an individual close to you that does that. If you think about it for a minute, that's a stimulus response. There's some trigger in the environment, say a word or a glance or a tone of voice or something like that, that then triggers off a behavior that we think of as acting out or being angry. Same is true of depression. A lot of times depression is a pattern stimulated by a particular trigger. Not in every case, but very often. So if that trigger shows up, the individual goes into a sad state. They're then miserable. Same can be true of fear and panic. I didn't realize this at the time, but one of the reasons that I had this eczema, was because my brain was running on automatic, was running a fearful, panicky pattern. Self-confidence, a lot of time, again, is triggered. We're not allowed sometimes to be considered to be tall poppies, and we get put back into a box and behave ourselves. So all of these patterns have something in common, that there's some sort of trigger that then goes into an automatic pattern, and we don't get the chance to think about it because it happens so quickly. Now, fortunately, because our brains have this quarter of a second, we can begin to use it. So let me explain how to do that. See, what we want to do is we want to interrupt the patterns that are getting in our way. And the way to do that is to learn to be able to talk to your brain. Would you like to be able to talk to your brain?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So just in the same way you can talk, you can tap your brain and say, hello, there's another way for you to be able to talk to your brain. So what I want you to do is make yourselves comfortable in the chairs that you are. Make yourself shift around, make yourself comfortable. That's it. Perfect. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take 3 deep breaths. And I want you to pay attention to the exhale, because it's the exhale that allows the diaphragm and the heart to calm the brain down. And it's called the relaxation reflex. So we're going to take 3 breaths together. Are you ready? Here's the first one. Big deep breath. That's it. Good. And then let it out really slowly. You should be able to feel it right at the end of the breath. Another deep breath. Let it out really slowly. Perfect. And then your last deep breath. And let it out really slowly. And now, all I want you to do is just close your eyes for a moment. And with your eyelids closed, roll your eyes up to the top of your head, like you're looking at the ceiling. And when you get that little bit of eye strain, relax your eyes and keep your eyes closed. Now, that's how you say hello to your brain. 3 deep breaths, close your eyes, roll your eyes up to the top of your head, relax your eyes and keep your eyes closed. You can say hello, brain. And wouldn't it be nice when you were saying hello to your brain that you could say to it, you know, this anger thing or this depression thing or fear or lack of self-confidence? I'd like you to begin to install a different pattern. So when those triggers happen, I get the chance to kind of put the clutch in there and choose a different response. And now you can come back. So anytime in the future you want to be able to talk to your brain, to begin to instruct it, ask it questions, all you need to remember is 3 deep breaths, close your eyes, roll your eyes up to the top of your head till you feel that eye strain, relax your eyes and keep your eyes closed. It can only mean that you want to talk to your brain because it's not a thing that we ordinarily do in social discourse. I should think this is the first time you've ever done that. So it's a very special signal, like tapping on the top of your head, and you can use it anytime you like. So anytime in the future, if you look at the areas of your life that you're hurting, let's say with depression or fear or anger, you can just begin to say to yourself, well, wait a minute, I'm going to do this eye roll thing. Don't know if it'll work. Say hello to my brain and begin to ask my brain to change the patterns that it's using. And what will happen is when those triggers come up, you'll find your brain will go, oh, is this one of those? You don't want me to go off the deep end? Oh, yeah, thanks very much. And you'll find what will happen is this will speed up and you'll begin to modify your behaviors. And by the way, when you find that you're doing it and your brain pops that idea in, say thank you, which will encourage your brain to do it more. Before long, you're now running on new automatic habit patterns that will trigger 250 milliseconds before you're aware. So that's one of the first ways of you actually applying these techniques, as it were, to your mind. Now, we can turbo boost that. We can accelerate that process even more. So let's pick a pattern again, one that you really want to take care of, that you can now begin to use sleep. Now, sleep gets a bit of a short shrift. We think, oh yes, we're going to go to sleep. We're going to bed now. But when you think about it, when you're asleep, your brain is still active. And wouldn't it be nice to be able to use those 100 trillion computational elements while you're fast asleep? The answer is yes. So back to the list of areas that you want to deal with. And you ask yourself, yes, that hurts enough. Now what I want you to do is pick a pattern. Let's say anger. It doesn't matter what the pattern is. It could be stupid stubbornness, and I know no one there at PROBUS is stupidly stubborn, but you could pick something like that. And what I want you to do is simply write a little essay to yourself. Dear brain, or dear me. I sometimes go off the deep end and then write a little essay, maybe 1 page, 1.5 pages of the behavior you want to modify. Okay, you've got it? Now take that piece of paper or those pages to bed. And just before you fall asleep, read through it. Just glance through it. Your brain will know what you wrote on it. It wrote those words for you. And then as you've read through it, just as it's time to fall asleep, put your head back on the pillow, take those 3 deep breaths, and in your mind's eye, scan through what you just read. And what's going to happen is, as you do that eye roll technique, you're going to roll your eyes up to the top of your head, you're going to imagine that piece of paper, and that will be sufficient instruction for your brain as you fall asleep to begin to take care of whatever that pattern is that you want to deal with. Okay? And please, when you notice your brain popping these ideas in, hey, is this one of these patterns? Do you want to smile here rather than go off the deep end? Or do you want to be cheerful rather than miserable? Or do you want to not run into a panic pattern? Say, yes, thanks very much. The reinforcement of you thanking your brain will make it happen more regularly. At this point, I would say, do you have any questions? But we're going to hold the questions for now, please. So as we're talking about sleep, I want to give you, some of you probably already know this. By a show of hands, how many of you regularly, deliberately use your sleep to be able to solve problems or gain awareness? How many of you already do that routinely? Do any of you do that? 1 or 2 of you. Okay. And for those of you, I applaud you. This business of directing sleep is hugely important. You can use it not only to deal with issues of your mind you want to clean up, if you like. You can ask complicated technical questions and get answers to questions. You can reinforce skills. You can gain awareness. You can stop doing stupid things. There's a fellow called Kekule, a German chemist in the 1860s, discovered the structure of benzene in a dream. He was puzzled as to why benzene had the certain amount of hydrogen and carbon, but no one could figure out how it worked. And he fell asleep in his study in Germany, and as he was falling asleep, he began to see in the firelight a snake beginning to bite its own tail. And at the point that the snake bit its own tail and created a circle, Kekule woke up realizing the structure of benzene was a ring rather than a string, which had been the idea up to now. That dream is worth trillions. Look at anything, find anything plastic in your environment. Just look around for a minute and look for something plastic. You can trace that plastic product back to Kekule's dream with the snake, because that became the first organic chemist. So just to underline it again, this idea of the sleep and the sleep cycle is important. At the moment, you and I are awake. But as we fall asleep, we go through a twilight zone where this programming begins to happen, where you begin to give your brain instructions. And as you fall deeply asleep, you go through a number of cycles of REM sleep, where you're dreaming, stage 4 sleep, where you're not dreaming at all and your body's repairing itself, and you go through these cycles through night. When you awaken in the morning, you come through that twilight zone again, and that's often where we get the insights. So I want you from this point forward to realize just what a power you have with sleep, and you can direct it because it's during the sleep cycle your brain reprograms itself. Okay, all right. Now, I mentioned at the start when I began to talk about the applications of neuroplasticity that it falls into 3 main areas: the mind and the brain, if you like, and then the body itself. But we're really lucky to live at a time where there are now tools that we can use. We can actually apply some tools to help us go even faster. And here's one such tool. This is an external brain tuner, a neurostimulator. It runs off a regular 9-volt battery. And there's a lot of these on the market nowadays. And what you do is, this little tool can do 27 different types of functions. And all that you do is you take one of these little electrodes, and this is water, and put some water on the electrode and hang it on your ear like this. And now what I can do is I can turn this unit on, nice full battery, and I can select one of a number of frequencies. In this case, I'm going to select a frequency which will get my brain to be lively. I want you to have the best possible experience. I want to be on. It's 3:30 in the morning here in Spain. I want my brain to be alert. So I can actually turn this device so that now it is stimulating my brain. I feel a very slight little tingling, and my brain will now follow along with a frequency equivalent to me being 10 o'clock in the morning, just had my first cup of coffee, and I'm full of energy and ready to go. So in other words, I can now begin to use tools. I just set it and put it in my pocket, set it and forget it. I can use tools to help me with things associated with one's mind, things associated with one's brain, and things associated with your body. For example, let's go back to the idea of wanting to clean up a depression or anger. I could set a different frequency with this device that actually begins to calm my brain down automatically, so that my brain itself doesn't have to be on high alert. It doesn't have to be hypervigilant, and it can begin to calm itself. So you can simply, by using an external brain stimulator, you can begin to take care of a lot of those things on the mind category of depression and anger and so on, and begin to automatically calm yourself without having to do anything. The other thing is that the same tool can be used to, let's say, deal with the body. So let's think about pain for a minute. You may know some people who are experiencing pain and would rather get rid of it. The exact same device, the same signal processor, using different electrodes, can be applied to different portions of the body to turn off the nociceptors, those proprioceptors that detect pain. So you can use a tool like this to actually begin to intervene in what your body is doing. The same with balance. You could use the same tool to begin to operate or begin to communicate with that portion of your brain involved in balance, in the motor cortex. The same with insomnia. You can also use it if for addiction. You can begin to calm addictions down using these external tools. You can also use the tool to brighten your brain, to speed your brain up. So these areas are, I'm just going to quickly go through them. Again, I'm recording it, so you don't need to make notes. This idea of hanging a brain tuner on your ears is called cranial electrostimulation. Cranial electrostimulation. And you can use it for calming your brain, boosting your brain up, and doing all sorts of other things. You can use the same tool for, in a modality called microelectric therapy, where you calm pain signals down within the body. And a different set of electrodes for a technique called transcranial direct current stimulation. So what the idea that I want to land with you is that there's lots of these tools available nowadays on the market that you can begin to use immediately that take advantage of this notion of neuroplasticity. And by the way, they're very safe. They've been thoroughly tested, and a lot of them have been around for over 100 years. It's funny to think that, over 100 years. Now, at the same time, I've got the chance of working with people in the United States. I'm always looking for new technologies. And you may have heard of deep brain stimulation. Have you, just by a show of hands, how many of you heard of deep brain stimulation, where they'll drill a hole in the top of your head and put an electrode down? How many of you heard of that? Good for Parkinson's. A number of you. So it's a very powerful technique, but unfortunately you've got to have an operation to actually drill a hole in the top of your head and put an electrode down to within the deep portion of your brain. Wouldn't it be nice if you could have an external deep brain stimulator? And the answer is, this idea is coming on the market. There's a young group out of Ohio University where you'll literally put a little headband on the top of your head like this, and it will talk to the central portion of your brain. And that will be handy for people with Parkinson's or movement disorders. The important thing is that this field is burgeoning. There's all sorts of tools available already, and you can begin to use them now, whether it's for brightening your brain up, improving the function of your body, or taking care of some of these areas of the mind. Okay, that's that one. Hold on a sec. Talk amongst yourselves. All right, now let me just say one other thing. You don't have to be sick to get better. You don't have to be sick to get better. And there's lots of applications that you can use these brain brightening tools for to improve a skill, to improve something you're already good at. Maybe you've already got a great memory. You want to improve that memory even more. These tools will help you do that. You don't have to be sick. In other words, you can be just fine, but you can do even more with it. Okay? It's just the same kind of idea. Now, let's think about maintenance. And I'm going to cover some areas here that you're probably already doing, but I just want to emphasize. What I've talked about here are technologies and tools for you talking to your brain, being able to apply neuroplasticity, to be able to reprogram yourself in lots of different areas. But there's other things that you can do to improve your cognitive and physical function as a matter of course. You guys live in Australia. Now, I come from Canada. Baz didn't mention that. I left England in '77, moved to Canada, so I'm Canadian. And one of the things we Canadians have discovered is that we need more sunlight than we were getting. You've probably heard of seasonal affective disorder. Seasonal affective disorder means that you're not getting enough sunlight, but you're not getting enough vitamin D. So one of the things you can do is actually get some sunshine on your head, on the back portion of your head. Why? because it turns out your skull is translucent, and the sunlight can suffuse through the skull into the brain itself that acts like a retina. Your brain can turn photons into food, into neurotransmitters. So one of the things I get a lot of my clients to do is see if they can get about 20 minutes a day, don't burn, but get about 20 minutes a day of sunshine on their heads so that they can feed their brain. Another area related to that, of course, is exercise. You probably already know. You probably are already active. But have fun. Don't think swim. Swimming, I'm sure you guys swim a lot. I do aquafit, and what I like about getting in the pool is it's not only fun to do, you can stretch, and it's low impact. So if you're out walking or you're out swimming, you're in the pool, it would be easy for you not to have your head covered. Again, I don't want you to burn, but I'd like you to get more sunlight on your brain so that your brain can use those photons. Sleep is hugely important. If you're not getting enough sleep, then please do something about it. Sleep is that point where your body rejuvenates itself. So a lot of studies have shown that you can rejuvenate yourself by making sure you're getting plenty of sleep. Another area that's getting a lot of attention these days is ballroom dancing. Your wives will like that. But it turns out that the movements associated with ballroom dancing have a beneficial effect on the brain, on the frontal lobes, what's called the executive decision making and problem solving, because of the problems involved in ballroom dancing. Singing and music becomes important. It turns out that if you play music to yourself during the day of music that you really enjoyed when you were younger, your feet will start tapping and your brain will crossfire, will go and find those great experiences you had when you were younger and you learnt that music. Singing is important. Singing can help you. I've got a client in Los Angeles who belongs to a group called the Fifth Dementia. The Fifth Dementia, right? It's funny. And so this is a bunch of people with Alzheimer's who get together regularly and they do concerts. They're actually famous in the United States, the Fifth Dementia. You can look them up. They've been on TV, and what happens is, as you're singing, you can rejuvenate portions of your brain and access different aspects of your brain and your memory systems. Diet. I'm not going to harangue you on diet. I'm presuming that you're eating a sensible diet. Please do that. Puzzles. Do puzzles. Word puzzles or number puzzles, again, strengthen the brain. If you're doing brain IQ, keep doing it, right? These techniques stretch the brain and give your brain a challenge. Having friends, a social network. Again, you guys go to PROBUS. Keep doing that kind of stuff. These social interactions are important for our brains. It gives us a reference. And how many of you downloaded the article that Baz put on? Okay, all right. So you'll see what that article is talking about when it says a virtual fountain of youth. Is talking about being adventurous, getting yourself out there, exploring the world with some curiosity. Because travel and exploring the world challenges our brain, a new language challenges our brain to grow more dendrites. So they're just a number of the areas you can use for maintenance. An important idea I want to give you is the idea of neurogenesis. Neurogenesis. I said at the start that the brain can reprogram itself throughout life. Right? We're wearing nutty putty. It turns out that the brain is also creating new nerves, new nervous systems all of the time. Neurogenesis, new nerves. Your brain creates new nerves throughout life. It's really quite remarkable. It used to be thought that you got a certain number of brain cells and then they started dying off after the age of 22. It's not the case. Our brains are creating new nerves all of the time, and they're moved to areas that they needed. Even with people with Alzheimer's are creating new nerves. So this opens another door as well. When you think about it, well, our brains are constantly rejuvenating ourselves. So if there's all that I could do is offer you the idea that your brain is rejuvenating itself, I hope you can see your attitude to this later portion of your life is vital. Because now we don't know what we can and cannot do. The world is changing massively all of the time. There are walls, there are doors in our walls of our perception. Okay. So references for you guys to follow. I know that you're going to be interested in this field. I've got 3 books that I highly recommend. And again, I'm going to be sending these references to Baz so he can pass them on to you. The first book that I highly recommend is called The Woman Who Changed Her Brain. The Woman Who Changed Her Brain by Barbara Arrowsmith. She's a Canadian. She was born with 3 congenital defects in her brain, which meant that she couldn't actually understand how the world was working for the first 2 decades of her life. She and her husband learnt about this idea of neuroplasticity, and she used special exercises to regrow neural substrate in her brain that had never been there before. And she talks about her recovery in her book, The Woman Who Changed Her Brain. It's a very important book. Dr. Norman Doidge has written 2 books that are important, and I recommend both of them. The first one is The Brain's Way of Healing. In other words, what Doidge does is he gives you a number of case studies of how the brain is recovering from some form of trauma, and then you can use that to improve your own function. And The Brain That Changes Itself. So The Brain That Changes Itself and The Brain's Way of Healing in Norman Doidge's book, and The Woman Who Changed Her Brain. And as I said, I'm going to be sending those references to Baz at the very end. Okay. So I hope I've intrigued you. I hope I got you started. I hope you really did hang your belief systems of what's possible on that coat rack when I started. I'd like you to Google this word, this idea of neuroplasticity. You'll get millions and millions of hits, and you'll begin to see, wow, this is a real field. This is important. If you want to find out more about me, just in Google again, just put in The Brain Reprogramming Doctor and I'll come up. You can actually look on my website, thebrainreprogrammingdoctor.com, and there you're going to find a lot more on the different types of technologies I've talked about, the success stories, the people that I've worked with. So you'll get a good idea. It's designed to give you a good idea of what's available these days. How many of you are on Facebook by a show of hands? 2 of you. All right. If both of you would go on to you go onto Facebook and like the Brain Reprogramming Doctor website Facebook page, then I regularly post articles of interest there. Now you can tell I'm passionate about this field. I'm 70. This field is opening now, and we are a great segment for it. I'm passionate about getting these ideas out there. So I've already begun to put on our school, the Brain Reprogramming Academy School, some courses. We've got 1 course up at the moment, and I've got 4 more going up that explain these ideas of neuroplasticity. You can learn them a bit at a time. Baz has already mentioned the fact that he's already enrolled in it, and so these courses are very easy to follow. You can email me at clifford.saunders@thebrainreprogrammingdoctor.com. You can call me on my phone, 651-447-6447. That's an American number, but it'll get through to me anywhere in the world. And you can also Skype me. I think the last thing I'd say here is I'm here for you. You're an important group. Wouldn't it be dreadful if the PROBUS Mount Tamborine actually became world experts in the use of neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, and people came to you? And that'd be awful. Anyway, I'm here for you. And now I hope we've got, I think we're fine. Over to you guys for questions. So thank you for that bit. Thank you. Thank you.
John, can you turn the lights up? Is there any questions? Any questions? Wow.
Did I answer it all in one go?
What are these little devices you have there, that little machine? Where do you get them from? We wanted to know where the little machine comes from.
Okay, it comes from Canada, and what I'll do is I know Baz wants to get one of these. I'll be sending information to Barry so he can pass it on to you of how you can get hold of one of those units. I don't sell those units myself, but I teach people how to use them. So I'll send Barry the information so you know how to get hold of one. Okay. Next question.
Here we go. Okay. Having been to medicine in neuroplasticity, there are some studies that say if you take marijuana, your neuroplasticity really goes high up. What's your opinion on that?
Okay, could you just repeat that, please, for me, Barry?
This is Wolfgang. Wanted to know that there's been some research done on marijuana and neuroplasticity. Wanted to know if you knew anything about them.
Are you asking me if I've been to Nimbin? Are you? Are you? Let's face it. Let's face it. Marijuana and the cannabinoids are neurotransmitters, and the Chinese have been using. There's archaeological evidence to show that the Chinese have been using that for about 5,000 years. I think it's beneficial. I think you know. How many of you are ex-hippies? By a show of hands, how many of you come and admit it? Right? I would say
nobody owns up.
no one owns up, right? So I'm from Canada, where it's legal, right? And so a lot of people are getting a lot of benefit from marijuana as a neurotransmitter. Remember that the reason you get high, or the reason people have CBD oil, is because those neurotransmitters actually help the nervous system function better. I would say play with it. You can't hurt yourself, and it doesn't agree with you, stop using it. If you find it's beneficial, then continue. So good question. Thank you. Next question.
Yeah.
Yep. I just want to know whether the discussion we've had, is that on text? Can I make that text? And I haven't attempted to read it. And some of the words coming through, I can't hear properly. What this gentleman, what's your name? Gary should. Gary, is it? Gary. Gary wanted to know whether you could get this presentation in text, because it has been breaking up a little bit because our connection is not that good. But yeah, it's not.
But this recording would be better.
Yeah, don't. I have been recording this as we've been going along, and what we'll do is when we finished, I'll turn it into a Dropbox link so you can guys to watch the presentation again. So I've been recording it on another computer here, so you should have good audio and good video.
Right. Yeah. That's what we wanted to know. Thanks for that.
Okay.
Another Barry. Yeah, I'm fascinated by dreams, and you mentioned dreams briefly. What I'd like to be able to do is understand and get some meaning out of the dreams I have, which are pretty weird at times.
Well, that's funny. You know, immediately my brain went to snakes and so on. So I think it's fair to say that what's happening in our dream states is, and it's easy to do this experiment, our dreams are really a way of our brain processing information, experiences we've had during the day. And it's our brain's way. So one of the aspects of dreaming is it doesn't actually have to have any meaning in the real world. What it's doing is your brain is consolidating the memories and organizing it, and we get that experience of it's going along as a dream. I mean, sometimes your brain is giving you information in a dream. Sometimes it's not even a very subtle metaphor. And you can, in fact, if you want, you can even use this idea of the eye roll and just ask Brian. I call my brain Brian, by the way. You know, is there any significance to that crazy dream where I was running down the side of a cliff face just about ready to fly? You know, I mean, I don't know. Oftentimes I would say, don't bother attempting to figure out what the deeper meaning is. There may not be one. It's the brain's way of processing memory information. But in other cases, I think it's fair dues to just ask your brain, is there any significance to that? Are you giving me a message?
It's a bit like defragging a computer.
Yeah, it is. It's exactly like defragging a computer. That's an excellent point. It is. You're really defragging. That's why I say that sleep is so important, guys, because it's going to allow your brain to take care of things and organize your experience and reorganize and reprogram itself. Here's a thought for you. You ready for a big thought? Yes, I am. Tonight, as you fall asleep, you can run through in your mind the things that I've talked about, even if this has been breaking up a bit. You can begin to ask your brain, hey, begin to apply some of these ideas now while I fall asleep. You've experienced the talk. You've shown up for it. The idea of neuroplasticity is important. You're wearing a brain. So tonight as you fall asleep, don't be surprised if your brain begins to process the implications of this. Next question, please.
Thank you very much. I have enjoyed your presentation extremely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Could you please give me your views on grounding and also on hypnotherapy? Because those sort of things do work on subconscious mind as well. And when you're going to bed tonight, and if you are using those meetings, I'd like your opinion.
Okay, I'm going to start. So grounding, and what is the other one? Grounding and? Okay, perfect. Let's start with grounding. I am a big grounder. I believe in grounding. I'm an electrical engineer. Okay, I'm an electrical engineer. I'm very well aware of the fact that electrical fields can affect our protoplasm. If we're not careful, and I'm preaching to someone who knows the answer, I'm just going to tell the rest of these guys why that's important. A lot of the shoes that we wear these days insulate us from the natural grounding of the earth, which means our whole body is floating at a voltage higher than the rest of the earth, than zero. And it might only be about 350, 400 millivolts, but that's enough to change the protein expression. I first learned about grounding in the United States back about 20 years ago, where a senior nurse at one of the teaching hospitals in San Diego was conducting a grounding study. And what they were doing was all of the nurses and all of the doctors in the hospital were spending about 20 minutes a day. When they went for their walk, they went barefoot in grass. So I'm a big proponent and believer, and I do it every day. As much as possible, I will ground myself in my natural course of existing, and I think it's important. Thank you for that. Hypnotherapy. I like hypnotherapy. This technique that I've just offered you for the eye roll technique is a form of self-hypnosis. I prefer to think of it as dehypnosis. Dehypnosis. We've already been hypnotized that we're not allowed to be tall poppies. We're not allowed to do this. We shouldn't do that. We've already been hypnotized within a box, usually a box of fear. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to use those same tools to begin to get ourselves outside of that box? And so hypnotherapy and dehypnosis allows us to do it. Two great questions. Thank you very much. What was your name, by the way? I didn't quite catch it.
That's Patty.
Patty, nice to meet you, Patty. Good questions. Thank you. Next question, please.
So, one more.
There's no research. Is there any difference between the brain and the mind?
Oh my goodness me. I'm going to give a gold star to that man. All right. Great question. All right. Great question. Walter Penfield, the famous Canadian neurosurgeon, the guy, actually the first fellow to put an electrical stimulus on the surface of the brain to evoke memories, so very famous work, was quoted as saying, "I know where the brain is, but I do not know where the mind is." Okay, so there's a distinction between mind and brain. Now, in practice, what I do when I'm working with people, I make life easy. All right, I want to make life easy for us, so I literally talk about the brain. Right, here's my right hemisphere. Okay, my brain is 3 pounds of liver, 3 pounds of meat. Okay, it's a physical organ, hugely important. I've just found in practice that I can get people to go faster by thinking of themselves of what we're doing is we're reprogramming our brain rather than reprogramming the mind. But I want you to realize that in my mind there is a huge difference between the two. It's just in terms of getting people started, making it concrete, making these practices easy to use. It's easier for me to talk about it in terms of brain function because, let's face it, we live inside our brain. Our brain is creating our reality for us all of the time. Our brain knows a quarter of a second before we do what we're going to do, right? We don't have conscious free will. We think we do, but it's just a persistent illusion. But what we want to do is we want to use that fact to be able to get the brain to get round our same side of the table so that we can solve problems that we've got together. So I hope that answered the question. Yes, there is distinction between mind and brain. In practice, I focus on brain to make it concrete for people. I hope that answered that.
My name's Max.
Hello, Max.
Good morning, good afternoon here. My wife recently had some fairly serious 8-hour brain surgery to remove a tumour. It's all been very successful. But I was thinking more of the electrodes that they attach to a brain during that 8 hours and the effect that that had. The surgeons actually used those electrodes to determine exactly the parameters of the tumour. And what the legacy of that might have been, and does the brain overcome that serious trauma?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. That's an excellent question. We're very fortunate that our brains are massively capable of reprogramming themselves. That what your wife will find is that with exercise, with pushing herself, with putting herself in situations, making herself, was it on the right or the left hemisphere did she have the operation? Left behind the ear. Okay. So around here. So okay. What she wants to do is she wants to practice speaking and singing and using her vocal tract a lot. Practice communicating, even if she feels awkward to start with. The more that she drives traffic in the areas where there was trauma, then the faster she's going to be able to repair herself. What's going to happen is, and you'll see this in the brain's way of healing, her brain will literally now begin to send out dendrites around the damaged area and reconnect those areas together. So the secret is exercise. The secret is practice. And the more she puts herself in those situations, the more her brain will send out those dendrites and to reconnect those portions of the brain. It really is remarkable. There's a wonderful example of an 8-year-old girl that had massive epileptic fits, and they had to take out a whole hemisphere out of her brain to cut down the electrical confusion. A year later, they showed her playing soccer. You couldn't even tell that she only had half a brain. Her brain has the capacity to make up for massive areas of loss. So we're lucky, and there's things we can do to stimulate that. And if you'd like some more ideas on that offline, then send me a note, and I'll be happy to chat with you offline about other things you can do to get that neurogenesis going, to get that healing going. Good question, thank you. And I'm sorry about the tumor.
Any more questions? Yes, good morning, Steve.
Good morning.
My question is, with the current explosive expansion of communications and so forth, including things like the G5 network, we're now being bombarded with a massive amount of various types of radiation, electronic interference and so forth. What is your opinion on things like using mobile phones and the C5? There's a lot of discussion, and fairly high level discussion on this.
That's an excellent question. That's an excellent question, and I am on the side of caution. I haven't looked. Okay, so I used to work at British Aircraft Corporation years and years ago. That's where I did my work on the brain and actually applied electrophysiology to weapons design. And I've known right from the very early age when I started my apprenticeship at BAC, you want to be very careful with microwaves. You want to be very careful with radio waves. And I'm not sure about G5. I think more work needs to be done to prove that there are no deleterious effects with the G5 network when you've got an agile antenna very close to your head. I'm cautious of it. I don't want to be hysterical about this. I still think it's an open question. I think we, the lay public, needs to be skeptical, and we need to protect ourselves and be sensible. So there's a book that I'd recommend. What's your name? I'm sorry, you were off camera and I couldn't quite hear your name. Mike. Mike, I've got a book that I particularly want you to get and read. It's called The Body Electric. The Body Electric by Becker. Becker was an American surgeon. He was the surgeon for Veterans Affairs in the United States. He dealt with a lot of squaddies who were badly injured in roadside bombs and so on. And he's the first person to really look at the use of electric fields for neurogenesis and physical regeneration. He's the guy that discovered that if you put an electric field between two bones that are not knitting, that electric field will tickle the bone fractures to begin to recombine themselves. So get the brain, the body electric. I think it talks to what you're talking about and forces people to think about the epidemiological issues involved in electrical fields around our body, all right? So I think that's what I would say. Again, the last thing I'd say is I started talking to people about a Faraday cage, Faraday caves. Michael Faraday was the guy that did a lot of the foundational work on electrical impulses, and he discovered if you covered yourself around with a thin mesh that you would be immune to radio waves and interference. I think the day may well be coming where we actually have these safe havens where electrical fields can't get in, Faraday cages. So I think more work needs to be done, and you're right to be asking the question. Thank you, Mike. One more. Here we go now. One more. You can do it. Is there anyone there? Come on. All the way from PROBUS in Mount Tamborine.
Actually, we're running out of time. I did say this would happen.
Could I just ask one question?
Okay.
How is it that during question time your voice was clear and good? Has the equipment learned how to deal with your voice, or have you changed your position in regard to the microphone? Or do we just get a better reception? What is the answer?
I think it's a reception thing. I think it's the NBN.
Okay. it's hard to pass through open the ectoplasm.
That's the matter alternatives. Is it true that the manufacturers could shield us pretty well from most of the radiation with a simple sliver of metal on the transmitting side of the device, and they just won't do it? Is that true?
Oh, that you're now taking me into an area outside my expertise. I would say this, that if it's an easy to put a fix on that, I would be surprised if they wouldn't put a simple mesh to actually guard the radiation. More likely, it's an antenna design thing. But you take me outside of my expertise. I'm not a microwave telephone designer. Anyway, but that would be my answer to that.
Okay, ladies, yes, we still have Cliff, it's been a pleasure to have you speak to us all this way, and I think everybody will agree that it's pretty interesting stuff. So did you enjoy this sort of thing? I really want to mention that. Thank you very much. I hand back to the President, who will wrap up, and one other question, just so that we can satisfy ourselves. Do you think this is worth continuing for perhaps another guest speaker in the future? Yes. That's an overwhelming yes. We've done it.
Okay, good show. Well done, Barry. Well done, everyone. Thank you all very much indeed. I've really enjoyed talking to you. And I'd like us to take the technical challenges that we had, as this was just version 1. It was our first go at it. Now, if you think about it, once you've dealt with the technical issues, you can have a speaker from anywhere in the world. Bye-bye.